Northwest Indiana to The Bridge. The Bridge is a purposely gathered collective of artists, designers, and influencers from a diverse palette of cultural backgrounds seeking to unify, advance, and service the public in the form of culture and art. We're hosting an art exhibition called Elevate for Autism. Our aim is to celebrate art and create awareness for autism. We got a chance to interview one of the artists in the show who just so happens to be on the spectrum. His name is Chris Casson. Let's learn more about Chris.
Hi, I'm Christopher D. Casson. I am a photographer, artist, and a podcaster that just happens to be on the spectrum. So, was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which some people would call high-functioning autism, and wasn't exactly the most easiest growing up, especially since I'd been going around different schools before settling into one and having to deal with, typical bullying, sometimes from kids, sometimes from other adults that, let's just say, could do a better job of learning to understand, but hey, that's how it is. I tend to process things slowly because that's just the way my brain is. It's just wired differently, and there's nothing wrong with it being wired differently, It's just the way it is, and you just have to learn to adapt, both the person teaching you and the person being taught. Because it's a two-way street, not a one-way, so this happens sometimes. That just freezes up when I'm overthinking of what to say, and it's like a giant flood of all these possible things that come in, and it just causes like overload the mind, kind of like how there's too much information with the CPU of the computer, and eventually it just has to shut down and reboot. So, me growing up, it's just the school. Some members of school faculty just assuming that I was just a bad kid, that I was just being troublesome, and not wanting to understand, being stuck in the old ways. Also understand that back then, I didn't understand social cues like everyone else, so that's how I got into trouble a lot of times, just not knowing them, and everyone expected me to just automatically know. I mean, trying to teach yourself about the being on the autistic spectrum. So my late mother, she started reading books about it and started sharing that information with the special ed teacher. She mainly looked at books like from Temple Grandin, very known autism advocate, and happens to be on the spectrum herself.
Okay.
So, and also just learning from other people that happen to be on the spectrum, since they know more about it than any other doctor, what it's
right.
like.
They're actually experiencing it.
Anyway, it kind of started with me just struggling to find something as simple as getting a job, and I already had low self-esteem back then because I had this bad attitude of thinking that autism was always going to hold me back after I started learning more bits in here and just trying to interact with the world that just felt like rejected me just because of it, at least in my mind. Eventually I got to a point where it was just get out of that little pity party, and eventually, I guess you could say, words came into my head that just, stop waiting for everyone to save you, just save yourself, because you can have all the help you want, but eventually you have to pull yourself up as well. I was in the art as long as I remember, starting with drawing, since my late mother was also an artist. She was in the charcoal and drawing until, unfortunately her health kind of declined, so it kind of prevented her from really continuing that. But anyway, it was just getting over that hurdle of just being able to talk to someone, since before then it was like trying to bust through a wall just to be able to do something as simple as, making that call just to order delivery for a pizza. I was just a nervous wreck back then, compared to now where I'm talking in front of a camera here. And so I've come a long way, and it was just getting over that first hurdle that it just became a snowball effect of just taking those chances and just pushing yourself out of that comfort zone, which even Temple Grandin advises parents to do, just to push them out of their comfort zone little by little, just to so that they be able to adapt later on in life.
Yeah.
And that eventually led to me going through interviews, which I do really poorly at because it was just those typical 20 questions that didn't really test my skills. It was just, and eventually I got to a point where I said, screw this, I'm making my own job, I'm tired of this. So I decided that from my graphic design internship that I was able to get from a friend in college, he actually did the interview differently by actually giving me a test, testing my skills, with giving me this little ad that he wanted to post on like social media saying, how would you change this? And he loved what I did, and that's how I got that. Someone that decided to think outside the box instead of, the usual conformity standard kind of thing, that actually got, end up with someone like me that was just wanting to be given a chance. So anyway, I just jumped right into photography with the business at first wanting to just sell nature and landscape prints, since that's kind of how I started, with taking photos while cycling, which to me was therapeutic in itself. Just me being able to be more mindful and just notice my surroundings instead of like everyone else that's just driving right on by all this beauty that's presented to us, lost in their head about paying this bill and, oh, what does this person think of me? And even though, to be perfectly frank, no one really cares. That no one really actually cares. No one's thinking of you 24/7, really, when you really get down to it. So, and I just jumped in, not really knowing anything about business at all. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into, which I had learned a lot of hard lessons. But eventually got to a point where I started developing this idea in my head of, I want to learn about entrepreneurship so I could teach other autistics about entrepreneurship and, being able to make a career for themselves and being able to show that they do have something to provide and they can contribute back to society. We all want to do that, but it's just of getting over that giant hurdle, you know what I mean? Of just people understanding us and seeing that we don't have a disease, we just have something that's neurological that we're born with that doesn't fade away over time, that we're going to have for the rest of our lives. And that eventually led me to, meeting different business networking events, which one of them, the owner actually started co-hosting a competition with a friend of his, an international one. It was the first of its kind, it's initially called The Next Impactor, but the name has changed to, I believe, The Next Global Impactor now. And he started talking to others in the networking event to join in, and started talking with me, and he just gave me the idea of, how about you turn autism into autism, a different label where we focus more on what you can do and what you can't do. And I've just been, that kind of clicked on, there's that connection, and I just been running with it. I entered that competition, and out of hundreds of people being in the top 50 at first, and we were splitting our own teams with our own coaches, and we voted on a nonprofit to support, which for ours, after hearing my story and my journey, they decided to go along with mine with supporting a nonprofit called Madison House Autism Foundation, where they help with housing for autistics, so that parents don't have to worry about what happens to their kids after they pass away, because eventually they're not going to be around forever. So what's going to happen to them? Are they just going to end up on the street homeless, or are they just going to be thrown in an institution to be left and forgotten, never to be able to live life? So this is just a way to be able to provide housing for them, and also all kinds of different programs such as art programs, and I believe there was equine therapy as well with them along with veterans, so it's kind of like a team up. Eventually, out of like hundreds and I think maybe even thousands of people around the world, I ended up number 4 out of the top 5 with my movement, and just met so many great people that I'm still connected with. We still talk to each other, and it's also during that competition that I got out of another comfort zone, which is, doing live streaming on Facebook, and I just wanted to do interviews with all the different members of the team just to get to know the team so that people can vote for us and, we can win. And eventually, from that, people from the other teams actually started coming to me asking to be interviewed, and decided, you know what, why not? Why not just talk about a guy that was formerly very reclusive, just staying in his room almost 24/7 and just going out exploring the world. And that's just another one of those things from the snowball effect. I just started from just wanting to hide away from my room to deciding to push myself to take a 30-minute drive just to see Lake Michigan, staying in loud cafes as long as I could. Started volunteering with being like a side photographer for the wedding photography studio that I was interning with the graphic design, which, of course, the first one had to be a giant Greek wedding and very loud. Had to step out a couple of times, but I kept persevering because I wanted to. I guess I just got addicted to see what I can improve. It all started with me deciding, because you can have all this other stuff, but eventually it just comes down to just you making that decision. Instead of having someone tell you what you can do the label, just explore what you can do because of that label. What kind of opportunities does it present to you? How can you bring something to the table that's outside of the box or outside the norm, instead of being forced into this conformity, which, people love to preach about diversity and, being yourself, but in practice, most people tend to still stick with that conformity mindset, either consciously or unconsciously, for better or for worse. So, and that's due to them just not being aware or more mindful of their actions. The podcast is called Thru Autistic Eyes, THRU for through. I kind of decided to get a little fancy there. And it first streams live through Facebook and the YouTube channel. So it's Thru Autistic Eyes Official. And so I usually air these episodes Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Chicago time, and it'll also be later, once I do the recording, it'll be later available in podcast form on all the major platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. Just me exploring through just talking to the other person, because again, both seemingly different worlds are actually just one, and it's just a way for me to get to know other people and then to get to know my world, so to speak, and just show that we have a lot more in common than you believe. So if you want to know more info about me, the podcast, and Autism, it's ChristopherCasson.com. That's CASSON.com. You can also learn more about my photography business, which I do events, currently dipping my toes into real estate and portrait photography at CassonPhotography.com, and there's also a link to that from the personal website too, if you want to go do it that way. Social media, mainly CD Casson Creates on Facebook, Instagram, really getting in the Clubhouse app if you've heard of that. Definitely been speaking a lot. That's basically it.